Travel and language learning. The two are connected. How do they work together? How do we improve our travel experience by learning a language? How does the travel experience improve our ability to learn? I would like to talk about this because I think it's kind of key to the whole experience of language learning. Because when we learn a language, we either are doing it, away from where the language is spoken, or we're doing it where the language is spoken. Most of us, of course, are in a situation where we are not surrounded by the language. The ideal scenario is to be surrounded by the language, but being in an environment where the language is spoken is no guarantee that you'll learn the language. I lived in Japan. Most foreigners there didn't speak Japanese beyond being able to say konnichiwa, subarashi desu ne, a few phrases. Lots of immigrants in Canada or elsewhere live for 30 years and hardly speak the language. On the other hand, many people become quite fluent without going to the country. However, ideal scenario, you're surrounded by the language, you can use it all the time. And the reason I'm talking about this is that I'm learning Turkish because my wife and I are going to Turkey in October. So I am preparing myself and I'm going to talk about the things that I'm doing to prepare for my trip. Things that I have done in the past that didn't work, and things that have worked, and things that I hope will work for me in going to Turkey. All right, so there are people who say, go to the country and you'll learn the language. Get a phrase book, go there, start speaking to people, and somehow, if you're there for a few weeks, you'll pick up the language. It doesn't work. I have done it. I have done it for Vietnamese. I did it for Portuguese. I did it for Croatian. It doesn't work. Most situations that they describe in the phrase book, you're in a grocery store, you're at the doctor's office, heaven forbid, or you're at the train station. You can't trot out the phrases. You end up using English, or nowadays you use Google Translate on your iPhone or Android phone. So the phrase book is not going to get you to a level where you can function in the language. And I did all of these for Vietnamese. Vietnamese in 60 minutes. I put a lot of effort into it. Getting started in Vietnamese flashcards. I did it all. And no matter how much you deliberately try to learn the grammar, the vocabulary with flashcards or phrase books, it's not enough. You'll still end up only having, a very limited level of communication with the locals. So that's the first thing that I want to point out. In order to maximize your experience when you're in the country where the language is spoken, you have to work very hard before you go there. And where I have been successful, Russian, Czech, Ukrainian, Romanian, Greek, those are situations where I put enough effort into the language in order to be able to actually have meaningful conversations. One of my benchmarks has been the number of words that I know on Link. 20,000, 30,000, quite a high number has normally been my target. So I looked at my numbers in Link, and back in 2019, I spent 3 months on Turkish. It ended up that I had about 9,000 known words, the way we count them on Link. And I said, I'm going to at least need 20,000. And I've got 100 and some days now, 100 days, 120 days before I go. So my first goal is to make sure that I stay with it, work with Turkish on Link enough that I can generate at least 100 words a day of new known words. What I am finding is that in the case of Turkish, it's actually quite easy to accumulate known words because so many of the words have so many different forms. Because each word, depending on the ending, can be a different person, a different tense, different intention. In case of verbs, the possessive, or the direction, all this stuff changes with these endings. And so very quickly, once you've gotten one or two words, or you've seen it in a few places, and then you're familiar with what these endings do, you start to accumulate words very, very quickly. So the good news there is that I will no doubt surpass 20,000 words. The bad news is that 20,000 words may not be enough. Now, the word counted Link, people complain, every form of the word is counted as a separate word. It's the only way we can do it because the system counts words that you save and don't save. If you don't save a word, the assumption the system makes is that you know the word. So it can be counted automatically. However, not a bad thing. It's a different function in the sentence. So to that extent, I don't mind that I'm accumulating all of these known words. It's motivating to see yourself accumulating a lot of known words. Besides which, the known word total is just a measure of your level of activity. So if I'm able to maintain 150, 200 known words a day, that indicates that I'm spending that much time reading and listening and saving words and accumulating known words. In a subsequent video, I will go into detail of how I add these words, the different things that I do, both in my vocabulary section and when I am working on the computer or working on my iPhone. But they accumulate quite quickly. But the point I want to make is that in order to be comfortable, when you go to Mexico or you go to China or wherever you go, Japan, you actually need a high level. So deliberately trying to nail specific words, phrases, scenarios is not going to do it, because you need a very broad base, a deep base in the language in order for these things to connect. What I find is, if I pick up a phrase book after I have already accumulated a fairly large vocabulary in the language, then the phrases have a chance of sticking. If I don't do that, as in the case of when I went to Vietnam, and I put a fair amount of effort into it over a few weeks, or maybe months even, I don't know. The only thing I could say in Vietnam was come on, which means thank you. That's all, because it's similar to come on in English. Nothing else stuck. The same in Croatia, even though I spoke other Slavic languages and I worked a bit on my Croatian, and I had a Croatian here, even a Serbian Croatian, it's more or less the same. Phrase book, nothing, no way, because it happens fast and you've got to be able to produce the language naturally, and the phrase books don't do it. So when we take a whole language approach, then it's a matter not only of getting into the language and acquiring words, and I don't know what that minimum level might be for Turkish or for Spanish or for other languages, but the thing is to get active, get into the culture. For example, I'm using YouTube. I've found a cooking channel at YouTube. I've found, a comedian at YouTube whom I recognize in a Netflix video. I'm learning about the history. So the greater my sort of general familiarity with the language, the culture, the background, the food, all these things, it makes it easier for me. And with all of this preparation, there will be fewer surprises. I'll be at a higher level so that when I get there, I'm hoping that I'll be able to function. We will see. Now, the final thing I want to make is that the trip to, say, Turkey, in my case, that's not the end goal. It's simply a milestone in my journey towards a better understanding of Turkish. Because if you go there, and I've done this now for other languages, and you function to some extent, and you're able to enjoy your stay because you have a sufficient level in the language that you don't feel sort of like a fish out of water, but then you come back, and if you don't use the language, don't do anything in the language, it'll start to go downhill. However, the good news is that when you go back there, or when you study it again, it all comes back stronger than ever. And that's been my experience. So it's not the final step. You're going to have to go back there, but when you go back there, it'll be stronger than ever. And in the case of my Turkish, my goal is not to go there and be able to speak to the waiter in a restaurant. My goal is to take advantage of my visit to Turkey to move my knowledge of Turkish forward. A, because it's a very concrete goal. I'm preparing for my visit to Turkey. That's motivating me. And when I get there, I'll be using it for the 10 days or 15 days that we are in Turkey. But I'm interested in Turkish history. I'm interested in the sense of, the Turks in Central Asia, and then the Ottoman Empire, and they controlled the Balkans, and powering of science 1,000 years ago, and the sort of interaction between Turks and Persians and Arabs and the Arabic language, and all of that is part of that history. And so I will continue to explore those things using the different resources that are out there. And I think that the encouragement, I hope, that I get from my visit will spur me on to continue with my Turkish, as long as I'm not distracted by going after other languages. And there's so many languages to explore, there's never a dull moment. Anyway, that's my advice. If you are planning to, work on your language with the goal of visiting the country, don't think you can just arrive there with a phrase book and somehow your language skills will improve. That has not been my experience. It may work for you. Rather, put as much effort as you can into the language before you go, and that'll make it more likely that you will truly benefit from being there in order to, further develop your skills in that language. And I will leave you a couple of videos I've talked on this subject before. So, thank you for listening. Bye.